Hello and welcome back to Dicebreaker. My name is Johnny and this is How to Pen and Paper, your guide to all things pen and paper role-playing games. We've already covered topics like how to pick a game and how to establish the tone between players, but this time round, it's all about you. Today we're talking about how to make fun, interesting, and even flawed characters. Making a character is the most significant thing you'll do at the start of any new campaign. After all, your character is your primary way of engaging with the game world. So, how they fit into that world, how they feel about its different elements, and how they act as they go about their business has an enormous impact on the type of experience you have. Furthermore, most games offer a wide variety of possible character classes and races, backgrounds and alignments, powers, prejudices, and driving motivations, so really it's no wonder people find it hard to know exactly where to start. Thankfully, there are two bits of good news to share against this backdrop of extreme analysis paralysis, and the first one is that character creation gets easier the more you do it. That's because your confidence will grow with practice, as will your knowledge of what kind of characters work best for you, as well as your sense of what might be fun, unexpected, and constructive in any given scenario. In other words, you'll be a professional in no time. Second, your very first role-playing character might be a bit one-dimensional. They might be very obvious. They might be a clone of you. Hell, they might even be a rip of a famous character from popular fiction. And that's okay. If you're having fun, then really, that's all that matters. Unless your character's main goal is to murder and/or insult the rest of his party. That is, because that is going to lose you friends very quickly. Of course, knowing something to be true and actually believing it are two very different things, so in order to get you started on your journey, I've made you this video. Now, my goal here is not to guide you through the basics of character creation for any one game. There are simply too many for me to actually do that. Rather, I want to give you a series of things to think about when coming up with your character concept that will, hopefully, make the subsequent decisions a little easier when the game you're playing asks you to make a choice. I'm going to run you through the steps one by one, and then I'm going to show you how I applied them when making a character for the Shadowrun campaign in which I'm currently playing. To begin with, when making a character, ask yourself in the broadest possible terms, who are they? I know this sounds very, very obvious, but trust me, having a kernel of an idea is the first and most important step of all. It's nice to have something to keep you motivated as you build the character. Something to bear in mind while you make other decisions like what their stats are, what gear they might carry, or how they feel about the use of lethal force. And that kernel, that initial idea, could be absolutely anything. Perhaps you want to make a character who fixes things for the party. Maybe they never back down from a fight, whether they're suited to it or not. Or maybe they're somebody who's hunting for a forgotten something, or even someone. It doesn't matter if it's something big or something small, as long as it's something you're excited about. Second, ask yourself why they're helpful. What does this character bring to the table that makes them a valuable asset as part of a team? Perhaps they're good with people, or they've got a bunch of useful connections in the world around them. Maybe they have a set of talents or magic skills that help defend the party. Maybe they're a really capable warrior, or perhaps they can conjure bees at will. Like I say, it doesn't overly matter what you pick, but identifying a thing your character has that makes them a useful party member can really help you suss out their motivation and their general demeanour. Because once you've identified the thing that your character does better than anybody else, then you can start to consider how your character feels about fulfilling that role. This is probably my favourite decision in making any new character because it helps flesh them out into something more than just a character class. If you have a really capable fighter, for example, there are lots of ways you can play that. You might play a warrior who thought their days of endless slaughter were behind them, only they keep finding themselves pulled back into unavoidable conflict. Once you've made a decision, then lots of other details will start tumbling onto the page as a result. If you've gone with the weary and reluctant warrior, they've probably seen a lot of military action in the past, so they're probably older than the average adventurer. They might have loads of scars. Maybe they wear a really battered and scarred suit of armour, something they've worn in every battle since their very first. Maybe they have a treasured weapon with a name and a legacy. And then you can ask yourself, are there any figures from their past with whom they still have a relationship, either positive or negative? Maybe they served under a general who made them charge a vastly superior force, getting nearly everybody killed for no particular reason. And if that's the case, has your character sworn vengeance, or have they managed to maintain military discipline? And so on and so forth. Or you can go a completely different route. Maybe your warrior is young and impulsive. They've never turned down a battle because they've never lost one, and they're keen to make a name for themselves. In other words, pick a class or a concept, and then try and find a way of approaching that class or concept that strikes you as a fun or interesting way to play it. Sometimes you'll come up with a concept that's a little tricky to play or even sets you constraints you could have otherwise avoided, and while that can be tricky ground to negotiate, I promise it's worthwhile. Some of the most rewarding characters I've ever played have been ones with unusual twists on the ordinary. I once played a nobleman who had no concept of etiquette, for example, in a game that was all about court intrigue, so he was constantly messing up in social situations with fairly high stakes. This meant he had to try and address the challenges of his status in new and creative ways. So, in other words, you might be making problems for yourself, but by the same token, you'll also provide yourself with some golden opportunities for really good roleplay. So, be bold. Alright, so you've come up with an initial idea for your character, you've picked an overall class or disposition, and you've given some thought about how your character is going to treat that class. At this point, all things considered, you should be feeling pretty good about your character and their role in the world. Now it's time to take that sense of capability down a notch by considering why and how they're fallible. In other words, now you know your character is cool and interesting, it's time to think about why they suck. Having a character with absolutely no weaknesses, flaws, shortcomings, or personal judgments is, in my opinion, kind of dull. And worse, it's unrealistic. Because in a pen and paper role-playing game, you aren't always going to succeed. Sometimes you'll fumble a roll, fail a save, or straight up get your ass handed to you in a fight. And if you have no concept of how your character would react to failure, you're going to end up pretty frustrated. The perfect hero, in other words, does not exist, and trying to create one without leaving room for failure or imperfection is just not a very good idea. Now, obviously, when you make a character, the hope is that they are going to prove useful, that they're going to have some bold adventures and some great successes, and so planning for them to have imperfections and blind spots can feel counterintuitive, especially if some of those shortcomings are entirely optional. The trick in this step is not to think of an imperfection making your character worse, even if that imperfection does indeed have an impact on your stats or abilities. Instead, think of each flaw as an opportunity to add depth to your character. Perhaps your character is overly naive or trusting, even when it's perfectly obvious to others that they're walking straight into danger. Think about why they're like that. Are they simply young and inexperienced, or have they made a solemn vow to always try to see the best in people? Maybe it's not naivety after all, but a sincere and desperate hope in the goodness of others. Or maybe you never take prisoners and always make sure to kill your opponents, even if they've surrendered. If so, why is that the case? Did somebody dear to you show mercy to someone and then pay the price? Or maybe you're a wanted criminal trying to cover their tracks. Drawbacks in your character can make life harder for them, but they can also make playing that character more interesting for you. Try to see these challenges as opportunities rather than burdens, and you'll likely end up with a much more rounded character. So if you've given each step some thought, you should have a pretty solid concept for your character and a good understanding about why they are the way they are. Knowing a character's history, however, is only half the battle. You've also got to work out what they want and where they're going in life. Planning out a personal goal for your character is a good way to give them a meaningful arc and something to strive for. If you look at some of your favourite characters from films, games, books, or any other media, you'll notice they all grow in some way over the course of their journey. Sometimes they change for the worse, sometimes for the better, but either way, they learn something that makes them an appreciably different person than they were at the very beginning. And again, the thing they want can be big or small, but having a direction in mind for your character can really help you start to play them convincingly around the table, especially if they also have something to lose. Knowing where they're vulnerable and what elements of their life they'd do anything to protect can also be really fertile ground for character development, something I'll come back to shortly. As you can see for yourself then, building a character is all about working out what happened in the past to make them who they are, then thinking about how their background would influence their day-to-day actions and what they want from life. Now, I'm going to pause here to give you a very quick note about tone, because if there's one thing new players are especially prone to doing, it's making a super dark backstory. Having some truly awful things in your character backstory can feel very powerful, as can making sure that character has nothing to lose, but in my opinion it also closes off a lot of creative avenues when it comes to playing that character week in, week out. Having a super dark past you're unwilling to explore with others may feel brooding and poignant to you, but the problem here is that you're assuming the story will get out eventually and that the other characters or players will care enough about it to keep trying to get you to open up. More often than not, they won't. Having a completely desolate background can also make it difficult for your character to progress, because if they've got nothing to lose, then it's also very hard for them to care about anything. Now, I'm not saying a character with a dark personal history is guaranteed to be one-dimensional or uninteresting. It's entirely possible for a character to have a traumatic past and still be an interesting part of the group with depth and wants and hopes and dreams. What I am saying, however, is that it's a very, very easy thing to overdo, leaving you with a character who doesn't really prompt good interactions with the rest of the party and can frankly be a bit of a bore. It's absolutely fine to have a character with a gloomy backstory, just be careful to find the right balance between their troubled history and the way they engage with the world now. And that, roughly, is how you make a character. Obviously the game you're playing will ask you to make a bunch more decisions particular to its rule set, but if you use these as guiding principles, you should have a relatively straightforward journey into making a character you're excited to play. To recap, come up with a basic hook, something that gets you excited, then determine why they're useful, what role they'll play in the party. After that, consider how they feel about fulfilling that role, and then think about why they're fallible. Give them some flaws. Then you can tie it all together in a backstory that feels right for you. These are the same basic steps I followed when making the character I currently play in a campaign of Shadowrun being run by my friend Luke. Echo is an orc. She's an aspected magician who used to work for a megacorp but gave all that up in order to start life as a Shadowrunner, but that's not really where I started when I began planning her. The kernel I started with was the idea that Echo has people depending on her, people she loves fiercely and will do anything to protect. I decided playing as a mage was the right decision for me, as I fancied being very stealthy, and there are some really great illusion spells on offer in Shadowrun 6th World. Echo feels quite positively about her role as a mage, as it's what gave her a start in life, letting her support the loved ones I mentioned previously. As a result, she takes Shadowrunning very seriously. She holds to the Pirate's Code, for example, insisting everyone gets an equal share of the pay. Echo is fallible, however, thanks to the fact she is really, really heavily in debt to some very bad people. In order to pay for the magic focus, armour and weapons that got her started as a Shadowrunner, she got heavily into debt with some loan sharks. Those loan sharks know about the loved ones Echo is supporting and use the threat of harming them in order to keep her in line and keep the payments rolling in. She has to pay about 3,000 new yen in interest every single month before even hoping to pay off any of the money in the principal debt. Not to mention the fact that 25% of everything she makes automatically goes directly to her family. As a result, she finds it very difficult to turn down work, even when she thinks it's an immoral or very dangerous job. Once I'd nailed all of these things down, it was really easy to tie it up into a coherent backstory. See, Echo was headhunted by the megacorp Ares at an early age, thanks to her magical abilities. She was proud of this work as it let her move her family out of a squalid apartment and into a nicer place. However, she didn't agree with the way things were handled at Ares and eventually couldn't hack the corporate life any longer. Getting into debt with some loan sharks, she started a new life as a Shadowrunner without telling her family because she thought they'd be ashamed. As long as the money keeps coming in, they probably won't find out. But because she's under so much pressure, she takes her work very seriously and cares a lot about the crew she's running with. At the same time, however, she'd be lying if she said she didn't also really enjoy the life of a Shadowrunner. So hopefully you can see from that brief description how I was able to use those simple talking points to make a character with a clearly defined role, something to lose, a dream to pursue, and an outlook on life that not only makes sense given their backstory, but influences how they express themselves in the day-to-day. And that, my friends, is how you start making an interesting character. It's not an especially challenging method, but thankfully, it's a pretty rewarding one. And that about does it from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, there are loads more from Dicebreaker for you to watch. Some of them should be popping up on screen now. Do like, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you don't miss anything else from us. But most importantly, thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day.